Thanks so much for tuning into our webisode, What is a USDOT number? Today I will be discussing the answers to some of the more common questions that I and my team receive regarding USDOT numbers. Now, we discuss a lot of important credentials that motor carriers must have in the trucking business. But of all of them, the USDOT number is probably the most important and really where it all begins for you as a company involved in transporting either people or property. All carriers that operate CMVs, those are commercial motor vehicles, in interstate commerce must have a USDOT number. In addition, most states, 36 of them, require commercial motor vehicle registrants to obtain a USDOT number as well. Now, the USDOT number is your company's unique identifier, and it's used by the DOT when collecting and monitoring the safety information of your company. That safety information is acquired through audits, compliance reviews, crash investigations, and inspections. Any company that operates commercial motor vehicles transporting passengers or cargo in interstate commerce needs to register with the FMCSA or the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and obtain a USDOT number. Now, some believe that intrastate operations aren't regulated. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Intrastate carriers are regulated. To receive federal dollars, states need to either adopt the federal regulations or put in place their equivalent. So it's not so much of whether intrastate carriers are regulated, but who regulates them? The answer, of course, is that the states do, as opposed to the FMCSA. Now, if you don't know your state's rules, then you need to work with somebody that does. And, of course, J.J. Keller would be a really good choice in that space. Now, when we receive USDOT questions, most of the time, we find that we must first determine if a commercial motor vehicle is even being operated. Well, the broadest definition of a CMV is found in 390.5 and includes a vehicle that's being operated in interstate commerce on a highway. The vehicle weighs 10,001 pounds or more, either by actual weight or the manufacturer's rated capacity. The weight also takes into consideration any trailers that might be connected to the power unit and operating as a combination vehicle. The definition also includes a passenger-carrying element, described as a vehicle carrying more than 8 passengers, that does include the driver, when compensation is involved. Or it's designed to carry more than 15 passengers, regardless of the compensation. Now, vehicles that are carrying a placardable amount of hazardous material are also always considered a CMV. Now, you may have noticed that there's 2 qualifiers before those vehicle descriptions, being highway and interstate. Now, both are defined in that same section, in section 390.5. The highway definition includes any private or public way that's open to public travel. And then open to public travel is continues in that same definition of highway, meaning the road is available and passable by standard passenger cars and are open to the general use of the public without restrictive gates, prohibited signs, or by regulation. Now, the term interstate, well, that's a bit more complicated. So what then is the difference between interstate and intrastate? Well, interstate is determined by whether the people or property in the vehicle are destined for or are traveling through another state or country or began their journey in another state or country. Now, it does include, of course, then the first or the last mile of transportation. Interstate commerce is determined by the essential character of your movements. So when the intent of the transportation being performed is interstate in nature, that means that the driver and the commercial motor vehicle are subject to the USDOT regulations. Now, carriers are not always sure if they're involved in interstate commerce until one of the worst possible times. That could be an audit, it could be a compliance review, or worse, a civil case. Now, secondary movements can be very gray to determine whether they're inter or intrastate. So when in doubt, the best bet is to assume the movement is of the interstate variety. Now, the FMCSA is pretty straightforward in their guidance regarding what type of operations are intrastate only. They say that if you perform trade, traffic, transportation exclusively in your business's domicile state, that's intrastate commerce. So when the movement is strictly intrastate, the state's definition of a CMV is going to determine what, if any, regulations the driver and the vehicle need to follow. Now, since having a USDOT number does enable the FMCSA to track your safety record, the number must be displayed on the vehicle. Now, of course, there are specific directions on how you are to mark your vehicles. Those do include putting your company's legal name or single trade name or DBA on the vehicle. But you can only use that trade name or DBA if you've included it on your MCS 150. Next to appear are the letters USDOT, followed by, of course, your company's USDOT number. Now, these markings, they need to be on both sides of the commercial motor vehicle on the power unit itself. I get asked often about the size and the federal requirement. Don't go into any size requirements other than the letters must be in sharp contrast to the background, and the markings need to be visible from 50 feet away in the daytime, in daylight. If there's more than one name displayed on the vehicle, then the carrier's name needs to be preceded by the words operated by. Now, for interstate vehicles, there's no need to display the VIN number, the company's address, the unit number, the size or the length of the vehicle, or the gross vehicle weight. But if you're operating in intrastate commerce, the state may require additional markings. Now, USDOT numbers, they can't be transferred from one entity to another entity. The FMCSA gets this question so often on their standard frequently asked question, they don't even try to elaborate. They simply state, no, USDOT numbers are not transferable. They do share additional information in answering another question, and that is, do I need a new USDOT number if I'm changing my company's legal name or my company's form of business? Now, in answering this latter question, the FMCSA explains that it's their policy to assign a unique USDOT identification number to each person that is required to identify themselves with the FMCSA. They then continue, USDOT numbers are not transferable and are assigned to only one person and remain assigned to that person forever. A person does include an individual, a corporation, partnership, or other business organization as authorized by state law. Now, each separate and distinct person must have a separate registration, and that's the end of that guidance. Unfortunately, I get asked about transferring USDOT numbers from one entity to another, usually after a merger or an acquisition has already taken place. By then, it's really too late to influence how you want the resulting company to be structured. It was all laid out in the transition agreement. Now, from a sale, merger, or acquisition perspective, of course, do bring in your corporate attorneys and other professionals, but also involve folks that can really influence what the structure from a fleet legalization perspective might look like. And this will enable you then to weigh the pros and cons and to move forward from a place of true understanding of what it all means. Now, I'm usually asked the question, can USDOT numbers be shared amongst entities? And I usually get this when carriers are borrowing or leasing a piece of equipment. Can we just, for instance, can they just run under our USDOT number? Again, since the USDOT number is assigned, and it's assigned as a unique identifier to each entity for the purpose of collecting data, then the numbers can't be borrowed and they can't be shared. You know, sometimes when explaining this, I like to put it in the perspective of a family. Each person of a family has a unique tax ID number. For us individuals, of course, that's our Social Security number. Now, depending on the family may consist of mother, fathers, brothers, sisters, children, but everybody has their own number. And then any income that is earned is tracked independently from one another. So that means that parents cannot use each other's numbers. Children can't use their parents, and parents can't use their children's, and siblings can't use one another. It works exactly the same way when you're looking at FEIN numbers and when you're looking at USDOT numbers. They are unique as that guidance shared to the individual. Kind of a related question is about terminals and divisions, and whether they need to have separate USDOT numbers. Well, those terminals and divisions are not in and of themselves legal entities. The locations and the business units then should report up through the main company that has the legal status, their USDOT number. Now, the FMCSA uses the term branch rather than division when they provide guidance in this area. They say a USDOT number usually applies to a company, not a branch or a vehicle. Generally, the corporate office or headquarters should register the company and should inform its branches then of the USDOT number. Now, for companies with multiple branches, maintaining proper registration with the FMCSA requires good communication between the corporate headquarters and the terminal offices. The company's headquarters can then interact with the FMCSA to ensure that all the branches are properly accounted for. And that's absolutely the preferred method of the FMCSA. Now, getting a new USDOT number can also be a violation. The reason is that carriers that have poor CSA scores or poor performing divisions, or maybe they've been placed out of service, they may want a do-over or they want a clean slate, and they think they can get a do-over or clean slate by applying for a new USDOT number. This just simply isn't allowed. The FMCSA has a term for it. They call it Reincarnated Chameleon or affiliated carriers. And they define the term as carriers with common ownership, common management, common control, or a common familial relationship. And that relationship was created principally to avoid complying with an FMCSA order, complying with a statutory or a regulatory requirement, paying a civil penalty, responding to an enforcement action, or being linked to other negative compliance history. Now, we're all familiar with the old adage, if you keep doing the same things, you're going to continue to get the same results. And so it's certainly tempting to create a new entity to get that new clean slate. But it's far better to work with your compliance experts to move your current operation from where it is to a place of compliance. Now, what we often find when we go and we're speaking to customers that are struggling with poor performance or poor CSA scores is generally one of three things. They either don't know the rules, or they don't have the systems and policies in place to really proactively track compliance, or third, they just don't play and enforce the rules, and that's really all about the culture of the operation. Now, the good news is, regardless of what the root cause is for those poor results, and it could be several factors, J.J. Keller can certainly help you in this area. Now, let me talk a little bit about biennial updates. USDOT numbers need to be updated biannually. What that means is every other year. There is a table in the regulations found in 390.19 that does inform you when the update needs to be done. Now, the table is based on the last two digits of your USDOT number. The last digit of your USDOT number determines the month that you update. So 1 equals January, 2 equals February, 3 equals March, and so on. And then the second to last digit determines whether you update in even years or odd years. If the number is even, well, then you update in even years. If the number is odd, you update in odd years. Well, technically, the updates are always required in the month according to that table. The FMCSA does have guidance saying that they will consider an update completed anytime during the 12 months preceding the biennial required date, and that will satisfy the requirement. It's also fine to provide updates in addition to the biennial update, and you may want to consider doing that. There are two CSA basics, crash and unsafe driving, that takes your vehicle miles traveled and the number of power units they have, and those are worked into the formula to determine your score and to compare you to other carriers. So if you're growing, you absolutely want to provide interim updates. And if you're reducing in size, it's also a good idea to provide those interim updates because the fees that you pay for UCR, the starting number is based off your MCS 150 counts. Another takeaway here is that if you fail to provide these biennial updates and you're an interstate carrier, that eventually will lead to the deactivation of your USDOT number and may result in civil penalties, so you won't be able to operate as a carrier any longer. So let J.J. Keller handle all of your operating authority. We can do so quickly, and we can do it easily. We've been working with trucking companies for over 65 years now. For more information, do click on the Learn More option on the right-hand side of your screen. So thanks so much for tuning in to this webisode.